I swear to God, if this meeting falls apart because of a translator, I'm holding someone responsible. Maggie Dunst hissed, heels snapping down the marble hallway. We've already tried the top agencies, the assistant stammered. No one can get here in time. Maggie stopped at the glass doors of the 22nd floor conference room inside the Boston Federal Reserve. She looked over her shoulder, eyes narrowing at the janitor quietly wiping down a corner table. Maybe she can help, Maggie smirked, not bothering to lower her voice. Unless Mandarin can be learned by mopping tile. A few nervous laughs followed. Sabrina Monroe didn't say a word. She just kept wiping, but her hands slowed slightly. She'd heard everything. Inside the boardroom, CEO Maurice Bell stood staring out the window, jaw clenched. The delegation from the China Development Bank was already downstairs. They were minutes away from signing a $140 million equity deal. And the official translator? Gone. Cancelled. Family emergency. Sir, Maggie walked in briskly. The best we can do is a translation app. They'll walk out, Maurice snapped. They don't play games with communication, and I don't lose deals over miscommunication. The room went tense. Executives exchanged helpless glances. Then, from the doorway, soft, clear, unshaken, Mr. Bell, I can help. Everyone turned. Sabrina stood still, mop now set aside. Her Navy janitor uniform looked out of place under the soft conference lights, but her voice carried something sharp, controlled, studied. Maurice blinked. You speak Mandarin? She nodded. And some Cantonese. I studied linguistics at Howard University, specializing in Chinese dialects. Maggie rolled her eyes. You're joking, right? This is a $140 million deal, not a school recital. Maurice ignored her. Say something. Sabrina didn't flinch. She looked straight at him and spoke fluently, confidently. Hengao Xingjian Dao Nin, Woman Shi Wang Jie Ci He Zuo Hui Dai Lai Hu Hui De Cheng Guo. The room fell silent. Even without knowing what she said, Maurice knew it was perfect. Every tone, every pause, exact. The Chinese delegation hadn't even entered yet, but something had already changed. Tell us where you're watching from, because the janitor they mocked was about to rewrite the rules of power. You're seriously letting her translate? Maggie's voice cut through the boardroom like a paper shredder. Maurice didn't even look at her. He was watching Sabrina, who stood by the door with her hands folded calmly in front of her. I'm giving her a chance, he said. Unless you've suddenly picked up fluent Mandarin since last night. Maggie went quiet, but her expression said it all. Sabrina stepped forward, gently set her mop bucket aside, and walked to the end of the long table. No rush, no fear, just that quiet, focused energy of someone who didn't need to prove anything, but could if pushed. I'll need a notepad, she said softly. One of the assistants scrambled to hand her one, unsure whether to make eye contact. A few executives exchanged looks. One of them, a younger guy in finance, leaned over to another and whispered, She's gotta be bluffing. Sabrina heard it. She just didn't flinch. The elevator pinged. All heads turned. 5 men in dark tailored suits stepped into the room, speaking softly in Mandarin as they looked around. The leader, Mr. Liang, nodded politely at Maurice and waited to be addressed. Maurice stood. Gentlemen, welcome, say. We apologize for the unexpected delay. This is Ms. Sabrina Monroe. She'll be our liaison for today's session. The delegation paused. Mr. Liang looked at Sabrina with a polite, unreadable face. Then she bowed slightly, looked him in the eye, and spoke in perfect Mandarin. Mr. Liang, thank you for your patience. We're honored by your presence and hope today marks the beginning of a prosperous relationship. The older man blinked. Then he smiled. A genuine one. He responded in Mandarin. Sabrina translated fluidly, and just like that, the meeting began. Maggie sat back in her chair, stiff, no interruptions, but her jaw clenched tighter with every nod Sabrina earned. Because what she hadn't realized yet was simple. Sabrina didn't walk into that room hoping for approval. She walked in prepared to take her place. For the first 10 minutes, no one in the room said a word, except Sabrina. She moved with quiet precision, seated at the end of the table, translating every phrase between Maurice and Mr. Liang with practiced ease. It wasn't just the words. It was how she carried them. Tone, timing, respect. "She's not just translating," whispered one executive to another. "She's controlling the rhythm of the whole conversation." Mr. Liang seemed pleased, his posture relaxed. He even chuckled once when Sabrina subtly reworded a joke Maurice had tried. A joke that, when said directly, would have fallen flat in Chinese. But the way she reshaped it made the whole delegation laugh, naturally, warmly. Maurice glanced at her, surprised. She nodded back, no smile, just calm control. Across the table, Maggie tapped her pen against her notepad, harder each time. She hadn't said a word, but her body spoke volumes, jaw locked, eyes darting, like someone trying to find something wrong, anything, but there was nothing. Sabrina was surgical. She clarified technical terms without hesitation. She shifted gracefully between Mandarin and English, not once checking notes. When Mr. Liang raised a question about equity distribution models, she even used a metaphor about bamboo growth cycles that made the whole concept land effortlessly. Maurice blinked again. How the hell had this woman been cleaning floors? And yet here she was, owning a room full of men in suits, not with arrogance, but with skill. Still, Maggie wasn't done. She leaned toward the assistant beside her and whispered, "You watch. She'll trip soon. She's not one of us. This won't last." But deep down, Maggie wasn't so sure anymore. Because what scared her wasn't that Sabrina was speaking Mandarin. It was that Sabrina spoke like someone who belonged, and the room was starting to believe it. "So," Maggie said, breaking the flow of the conversation with a syrupy voice, "before we move forward, I think our guests deserve to know just how unique Ms. Monroe's journey with our company has been." Sabrina's pen paused for half a second. Maurice shot Maggie a look, sharp and low, but she ignored it. "She actually started out cleaning our executive floors," Maggie continued, smiling directly at Mr. Liang. "Just goes to show, America is full of surprises. You can start with a mop and still land at the negotiating table." Mr. Liang blinked. His smile faded just slightly, barely noticeable, but Sabrina caught it. In Chinese culture, hierarchy matters. Not just titles, but how someone arrives at their seat. Sabrina stayed composed. "In many cultures," she replied in Mandarin, translating for herself, "we say life teaches through unexpected paths. I consider it a strength to understand this company from the ground up." Polite, controlled. But inside, something twisted tight in her stomach. 6 months ago, she'd overheard Maggie crying in the executive restroom, whispering on the phone about the black girl who keeps wandering too close to important meetings. Sabrina had pretended not to hear. She hadn't forgotten. Now Maggie had waited for the moment Sabrina was winning to strike. Publicly, strategically. Maurice looked stunned. Mr. Liang nodded slowly, but his expression shifted from trust to curiosity, maybe even caution. The air changed. For the next few minutes, the conversation continued, but with less warmth. The room hadn't turned cold, but it wasn't warm anymore either. Sabrina translated flawlessly, but she knew what had happened. She'd become a story, not a strategist, a curiosity, not a professional. Maggie sat back, satisfied, as if she'd just reminded the room who really belonged and who didn't. But what she didn't know was that Sabrina had been preparing for that moment longer than anyone could imagine. And sometimes, when someone tries to cut you down in front of the world, they forget one thing. You're the only one who knows how deep your roots really go. Sabrina stood alone in the private restroom just down the hall from the boardroom. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she stared at her reflection. Still in uniform, hair pulled back. Lip balm, not lipstick. No title on her chest, no security badge that made people nod when she passed by. But her eyes? They looked steady. Tired, but steady. She rinsed her hands and let the water run a few seconds longer than necessary, just to breathe. The way Maggie had laid it out, like her story was some rags to riches novelty act, not a lifetime of hard work, hit deep. And she saw it happen in real time. The way Mr. Liang's expression shifted, how the room cooled. It wasn't just a blow. It was a message. Know your place. And for a second, just a second, she almost believed it. She thought of her mother, the late-night phone calls, the hospital bills, the day she left Howard with just 6 credits short of graduation because someone had to hold things together. She thought of the old supervisor at her last job, the one who told her she was too intense to be promoted. And now, after all this, here she was, again, almost seen, almost trusted, almost enough. Sabrina turned off the faucet. No, not this time. She didn't claw her way back to almost. She wasn't here for pity or applause. She was here because she'd earned it. With every sleepless night, every overheard conversation, every detail she remembered when no one thought she was listening. Outside that door, a $140 million deal was still on the line. And someone in that room, maybe a few people, were betting she'd crumble under pressure. Let them. Because pressure didn't break her. It trained her. She dried her hands, fixed the crease in her collar, and walked out of the restroom without looking back. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. The meeting wrapped for the day with polite handshakes and muted goodbyes. Mr. Liang's team had agreed to take the draft agreement back for further review. A subtle but clear signal. No deal yet. Maybe never. As the last of the delegation exited the room, Maurice loosened his tie and dropped into the chair beside Sabrina. "You did everything right," he said, voice low. "That wasn't on you." Sabrina nodded, but didn't speak. Maurice looked at her, searching. "What is it?" She hesitated, then pulled out the printed copy of the proposed contract she'd quietly picked up during the meeting. She flipped to a flagged section near the end, buried in the appendix. "I think you need to look at this," she said, sliding the page across. Maurice leaned forward. His brow furrowed as he read the clause. "Deferred rights reassignment?" he muttered. "Paragraph 12.6, Sabrina said. "It states that after 6 months of dormancy, majority voting rights can shift to the secondary entity listed on file, which according to this structure is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands." Maurice sat back slowly. "That would give them control." Sabrina nodded. "Not just influence. Control of board votes, resource allocation, even product strategy." He looked at her differently now. Not like a translator, not like an employee, like a peer. "Where'd you learn to spot something like that?" Sabrina gave a small shrug. "I've been reading contracts like this for years." In silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maurice reached for the contract again. "We've been walking into a trap. No one on legal flagged it?" "They read what they're told to read," Maurice muttered. Sabrina looked him straight in the eye. "Then maybe it's time someone read what no one wanted to see." Maurice gave a slow, quiet nod. That clause could have destroyed his company, but the woman they nearly overlooked, she'd just saved it. That night, Sabrina returned to her small apartment in Roxbury. No lights on except the glow from her desk lamp. She kicked off her shoes, loosened her bun, and opened the hidden drawer beneath the floorboard, a habit formed long before anyone knew her name. Inside, a silver flash drive, an old laptop, and a single folder labeled in plain handwriting, FEDClear, SA, internal ethics risk, dormant. She stared at it for a long minute before plugging it in. Most people in the building thought she was just quiet. Some thought she was harmless. What none of them knew was that Sabrina had quietly retained her clearance to a system most forgot even existed. FEDClear, an internal ethics screening framework used by federal regulatory bodies in pre-deal evaluations. It had been quietly shelved 5 years ago after a scandal in DC almost made it public. Sabrina had worked on the data side back then, before she blew the whistle, before she disappeared. Now, staring at her screen, she saw it all again. Patterns, anomalies, familiar names. Maggie Dunst was listed in 3 flagged cases, 2 related to contract structuring discrepancies, 1 for equity misrepresentation tied to a venture-backed tech merger. All closed quietly. No further action. Internal notes said, no external escalation, insufficient visibility. Sabrina had printed everything. Over the past 3 years, she'd built her own audit trail. Dates, emails, deleted memos pulled from cached servers while cleaning after hours. Security audio, even copies of quarterly reports Maggie had altered before final board review. She wasn't just protecting herself. She was building a case. And now, with that shell clause in the Chinese deal, everything clicked. Sabrina leaned back in her chair. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just walk back in as a translator. She'd walk in as the one person in that building who knew exactly where the rot was buried and had the code to unearth it. It started quietly. No announcement, no showdown. Just Sabrina walking into the boardroom the next morning in a navy blue blazer, not her janitor uniform. She wasn't there to clean today. Maggie's eyes narrowed the moment she saw her. "You're early," she said, tone clipped. Sabrina gave a small, polite nod. "So are you." Maurice looked up from his tablet as Sabrina approached the table. "You ready?" he asked. Sabrina didn't answer. She simply opened her leather folder and placed a slim flash drive beside his laptop. "I think you'll want to see this before the next meeting." He paused, then plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly, Maggie froze. Because there it was, her name, in a federal clearance file, flagged 3 times, with dates, case numbers, and internal summaries. Not leaked documents, not rumors, just truth. "What is this?" Maggie asked sharply, though her voice betrayed the crack forming beneath her confidence. "It's called FEDClear," Sabrina said evenly. "An ethics risk system that was deactivated 5 years ago. I used to work on its back end, before it got buried." "You were janitorial staff," Maggie scoffed. "I was ethics infrastructure for federal pre-deal assessments," Sabrina cut in. Calm, sharp, unshaken. "Until you helped shut it down after it flagged you in a tech merger deal." Maurice turned toward Maggie. "You've never disclosed any federal ethics reviews." "Because they were nonsense," Maggie snapped, defensive. "None of those findings led to anything." "Because you suppressed them," Sabrina said. The room went still. Sabrina continued, pulling out a printed sheet. "Here's an internal email from 3 years ago, where you intentionally altered contract language on a health tech acquisition. The changes favored a shell company you advised under a separate alias." "That's not even legal," muttered one of the board members. "There's more," Sabrina said, her voice low but steady. "During the negotiation with the China Development Bank, you buried a clause that would have shifted company control to an offshore entity after 6 months. A clause no one else saw, because it wasn't in the version legal reviewed, but it was in the version you slipped into the printed packet." Maurice turned pale. "You tried to hand over voting control?" Maggie stood abruptly, palms flat on the table. "This is a setup. You believe her over me?" "No," Sabrina replied. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm showing you the receipts." She clicked to the next slide, an audio recording. Maggie's voice, clear as day. "They're not going to dig that deep. No one reads the subclauses, especially not Maurice." Gasps. Dead silence. Maggie's face drained of color. Her jaw tightened. She looked around the room, only to find no one meeting her eyes. Maurice slowly stood up. "Sabrina, how long have you been tracking this?" 3 years, she answered simply. "Since the first time I saw a contract disappear and reappear with different numbers." "And why now?" "Because you're 1 vote away from selling this company to people who don't even respect it. And if I stayed quiet, I'd be part of it. Maurice turned back to Maggie. You tried to sell us out for control. Maggie snapped. She's a janitor. You're all being played by someone who mops floors. Sabrina didn't even blink. And that's when Maurice said it, calm but final. She's the reason we still have a company. He turned to the head of security. Escort Ms. Dunst off the premises. Her access ends now. Maggie opened her mouth to protest, but no one listened. Her heels echoed against the floor as she was led out of the room, faster than she ever thought possible. The moment the door closed, no one spoke. Then someone at the table let out a long breath. Sabrina stood there, silent. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't begged. She hadn't needed to. She'd simply outlasted the system, and finally turned its weight back on itself. An hour after Maggie was escorted out of the building, the boardroom had quieted into an unfamiliar stillness. Not out of fear, but out of recalibration. Something irreversible had happened, and everyone knew it. Sabrina sat at the far end of the table, her laptop open, fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. Maurice stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the screen like a man who had just seen behind the curtain for the first time. You're sure about this? He asked. Sabrina looked up. You said you wanted transparency. Maurice hesitated, then nodded. Do it. With a single click, she launched the dormant system, FEDClear, back online. A command line prompt flickered, then gave way to a grid of familiar data feeds. The system had been asleep for 5 years, but not dead. As data populated the dashboard, Sabrina's hands moved with instinctive confidence. She was no longer the woman in the hallway with a mop. She was the architect of something bigger than anyone in that room could yet understand. She input the contract details from the China Development Bank deal, then ran the ethics analysis protocol. A red flag blinked immediately. Severe risk detected. Undisclosed control transfer structure, conflicts of interest, shell entity alert. Confidence score, 98.3%. Maurice's jaw tightened. What happens now? Sabrina didn't look away from the screen. This triggers a cascade. She clicked again, and 3 more tabs opened. One showed an automated alert sent to the Office of Ethics Compliance at the U.S. Treasury. Another sent a warning flag to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The third, notably, sent a hold protocol request to the Federal Interbank Clearance Network, temporarily freezing $1.2 billion in interlinked deals flagged for investigation. The room fell dead silent. One of the board members finally spoke. You just froze $1.2 billion in active contracts? Sabrina nodded. Yes, including 3 tied to other firms Maggie had personal stakes in. Maurice exhaled slowly. You really built all of this while pushing a janitor's cart? No, she said quietly. I built this while people assumed I couldn't. Across town, inside the Treasury Department's ethics division, phones started ringing. Within 15 minutes, a Treasury staffer issued an alert to 4 financial institutions to halt any deal connected to flagged shell firms. By the end of the hour, the story had reached the desks of 3 federal journalists who'd been chasing a years-old lead on ethics violations inside institutional banking. Inside the boardroom, the team stared at the screen, watching in real time as the dominoes began to fall. Sabrina closed her laptop. It's only the beginning, she said. Once they start investigating the clauses, the backdoor voting rights, the buried equity shifts, they'll dig deeper. Maurice sat down heavily, but his expression wasn't panic. It was clarity. And this system, FEDClear, why'd they kill it? Sabrina looked at him for a long beat. Because it worked. Someone finally whispered, what are they going to say when they find out who reactivated it? Sabrina gave a faint smile. Let them ask. Because this time, they wouldn't be able to bury the story behind titles or silence. This time, the whole country would know that the woman they ignored for years just changed the way the system checks itself. Forever. 2 weeks later, Sabrina sat in front of a long mahogany desk beneath the seal of the United States Congress. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and on the other side of the room, A panel of House Financial Services Committee members reviewed the folder marked FEDClear Reactivation Incident, Ethics and Oversight in Modern Finance. She hadn't asked to be there. She hadn't lobbied. She hadn't written a memoir or posted a video. She'd just done her job. Quietly, thoroughly, unshakably. Ms. Monroe, the chairwoman began, her voice measured. You worked as a janitorial contractor inside the Boston Federal Reserve. Is that correct? Sabrina met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. And yet, you uncovered an undisclosed transfer clause that had passed through 4 levels of legal review? Yes, ma'am. And in doing so, you reactivated a dormant ethics platform that has now triggered $1.2 billion in holds and launched 2 federal investigations? Sabrina's voice didn't waver. Correct. A pause. Then the chairwoman leaned forward. Ms. Monroe, do you know what makes this hearing different? Sabrina waited. You're not here because of what your title was. You're here because you did what people with louder voices and higher salaries failed to do. You paid attention. Behind her, Maurice sat in the audience. No tie. Just a proud, quiet stare. Sabrina looked at the senators. People forget the power of people who are invisible. But we hear everything, we see everything, and sometimes we're the only ones who remember what's worth protecting. There was a beat of silence. Then someone clapped. Just one, then another, and then the whole room. Sabrina didn't smile. She just sat up straighter. Not because she finally belonged, but because the room finally caught up. The podium was modest. The banner behind it even simpler. Second Sight Initiative. A new path for the overlooked. Sabrina stood there in a dark gray suit, hands resting lightly on the sides of the podium. No teleprompter, no PR team. Just her and an audience of 50 young women. Black, Latina, Asian, first-gen college students, seated inside a sunlit community center in Dorchester. She adjusted the mic. I never thought I'd be standing here launching anything, she began. To be honest, I spent more time learning how to blend into rooms than speak at the front of them. A quiet laugh rippled through the crowd. But 3 years cleaning floors taught me something no classroom ever did. People stop hiding things when they think you don't matter. She paused. That gave me sight. Not privilege, not access, but sight. That's where this initiative gets its name. She looked out at the rows of women, some nodding, some gripping notebooks like lifelines. The Second Sight Fund isn't just a scholarship, it's a strategy. We're funding 20 full-ride scholarships this year for women of color who had to drop out of school. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because life demanded they carry more than anyone their age should. Behind her, Maurice watched from the side of the stage, arms crossed proudly. This is for the girl who had to take the night shift, the one who stayed home to care for a sick parent, the one who never stopped dreaming, even when the world told her to settle. She closed the folder in front of her. We don't need more heroes. We need more people who can see what others refuse to look at and stay sharp until it's time to speak. The applause wasn't explosive. It was steady, long, the kind of applause that said, we see you now, and more importantly, we believe you always did. 7 months later, Sabrina stood at the glass wall of her new office, 37th floor, overlooking the Boston skyline. Same building, same hallway. Different name on the door. Sabrina Monroe, Director of Ethics and Strategic Integrity. Her desk held 3 framed photos. One of her mother smiling in a garden chair. One of her scholarship recipients from the first Second Sight cohort. And one of herself, taken on the day she testified before Congress, eyes calm, back straight. Behind her, the executive assistant knocked gently. They're ready in the boardroom. The South Korean delegation's here early. Sabrina turned, nodding. I'll be right there. She moved without rush, confident, focused. Secretaries greeted her now with respect. Interns took notes when she spoke. No one asked what department she was from. No one looked past her anymore. She didn't need validation. She'd built credibility in silence, brick by quiet brick. Outside the boardroom, Maurice waited. Still CEO, still still watching her the way a mentor watches someone who no longer needs mentoring. You know, he said, adjusting his cufflink, I still don't know how you managed to track all that without anyone noticing. Sabrina smiled. People overlook what they don't want to see. He nodded, thoughtful. And you? You saw everything. No, she said. I just didn't look away. Inside the boardroom, the delegate stood as she entered, not because of her title, but because of how she carried it. She took her seat, not the one offered politely at the side, but the one at the center. Because some people fight to be seen, others learn to see everything, and when the moment comes, they don't just take a seat at the table, they rebuild the room. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job, your background, or the way you look? Share your story in the comments. Do you believe that the quiet observers are often the ones who change everything? Tell us where you're watching from. And remember, sometimes silence is what makes the arrogant fall to their knees.